Hello, and welcome to the 13th episode of Season 9 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I am Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray.
Graham, I thought we might start today with a question.
All right.
What are regulated firms required to do to meet their AML obligations?
Well, quite a lot, Ray. I mean, for example...
Well, no, let me stop you there, Graham,
okay.
because I've got some options for you to choose from.
Okay.
Okay, so is the answer A, identify customers, B, monitor customer transactions, C, report suspicious activities, or D, all of the above?
Are you serious, Ray?
Well, let's assume that yes, I am.
Well, then, I'd have to say it's D. It is all of those things.
And that's the right answer.
Well, of course it's the right answer, Ray. Of course it's the right answer. What was the point of that question?
Well, I mean, that's typical, isn't it, Graham, of the sorts of question we often see in firms' annual AML assessments to confirm that people understand their anti-financial crime obligations.
Well, yes, it is, but the question stands. What was the point of asking a question that I imagine in the whole history of multiple choice assessments has never been answered incorrectly? It's the sort of question that, well, frankly, answers itself. All these things are obviously good and worthy things. I might say blindingly obviously good and worthy things. So who would for a moment believe that they were anything else? You may as well ask an American of a certain age, do you believe in A, mom, B, apple pie, C, the American dream, or D, all of the above?
Yeah. So I think we're saying that people approach these types of questions knowing what is expected, and they answer not because they know what the answer is as much as because they know how these questions tend to be asked and what the question setter wants to hear.
Well, yes, I think that's right. Of course, I don't think it lets you say very much about the skills or knowledge or likely behaviour of the person answering, though.
Well, I agree with you completely, but is that the point of this sort of test?
Well, it ought to be, Ray. You ought to be able to reasonably conclude that the person passing it knows and understands enough about the subject to be able to apply the principles in their day-to-day work. You want assurance that when certain things happen on their watch, they will behave in a way that reflects their and the firm's obligations.
And that seems like a lot to hope to get from an all of the above mom and apple pie type question.
Well, yes, but there are other questions and other approaches to testing, even to multiple choice testing, that can give us such assurance. It is perfectly possible to have a multiple choice test whose result, pass or fail, correlates directly with knowledge, understanding, and likely workplace behaviour. It's just that, well, in this field, we just don't often see one.
But today, and in a follow-up episode, we want to see if we can at least give some insight into how you would go about doing it. We can sometimes spend a day or more with a firm training their people on how to do this, so what we're going to be able to do here will necessarily be introductory in nature.
In 1956, I think, Ray, we both remember that year very well, not in your case, with the publication of a work called, and I'm quoting, Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the Classification of Educational Goals, Handbook I, Cognitive Domain.
A bit of a mouthful, Graham, and you did say Handbook I. Was there also an II?
There was, Ray. 8 years later, Handbook II, Affective Domain, was published, and later there was a handbook, Psychomotor Domain, which sounds much more exciting than it actually is, I'm afraid to report. But for our purposes, we only need the first handbook, the Cognitive Domain.
Yeah. Of all the things that the Romans left us, their numerals endure, don't they? And
They
remain
do.
prominent. Who was behind this handbook, Graham, and what would readers find in it?
Well, a chap called Dr. Benjamin Bloom chaired the group of educators and psychologists on whose work the handbook was based, Ray.
And in the book?
Is a model of very great beauty and immediate relevance to us today, Ray, which has become known as Bloom's taxonomy, and it sets out a classification of cognitive ability.
Now, that's thinking, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It places different levels of thinking in a hierarchy because not all capability is the same. Some is better and allows the person to achieve more than just a basic level.
That seems reasonable. So, where do we start in the hierarchy?
Well, I think we should start on the ground floor, Ray.
Okay.
The most basic level of cognition is what Bloom identifies as knowledge.
But surely knowledge is a wonderful thing, Graham. It's the basis of our great human civilization, no?
Well, I suppose so, but Bloom defines knowledge as simply the ability to recall facts.
So if I can recall that Arsenal have won the FA Cup 14 times, that counts as knowledge.
A sort of knowledge, but yeah, yes, it does, Ray. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's very good then.
Well, as far as it goes, yeah.
What do you mean, as far as it goes?
Oh, Ray, let me ask you, have you found that knowledge to be useful at all?
Well, only in pub quizzes, to be honest, Graham.
Well, exactly. And crucially, we can conclude little from your ability to recall that fact, can we?
How do you mean?
Well, does knowing that fact evidence that you understand how Arsenal won each or any of those games?
No.
No. Does it even evidence that you understand the game of football or that you can accurately predict the outcome of a game between Arsenal and, say, Chipping Sodbury Town?
Is there a Chipping Sodbury Town, Graham?
Well, there actually is, Ray.
Oh.
They play at home in a ground called the Ridings, and their first team plays this season in the Hellenic League Premier Division.
I see. Well, I might have an opinion on who would win such a game, certainly, but that would have to be based on knowing more than the fact that Arsenal have won a thing called the FA Cup 14 times. I mean, you could have just told me that a minute ago.
Exactly, Ray, and this is the point. Knowing a fact is the lowest level of cognition because on its own, it doesn't equip you greatly.
OK, so if I move beyond basic knowledge, what's next?
Well, the next level is one Bloom called variously comprehension or understanding.
Now, instinctively, I think we know what this is. To understand something, you have an insight into meaning or interpretation, right?
Yes, and typically we are beyond simple facts here and into the realm of principles.
Well, how do you mean?
Well, beyond just being able to recall a fact or even a number of facts, if you understand, you can make connections, you can interpret patterns or principles. You could, for instance, understand the purpose of, say, the centre-half position in football.
Or the offside rule, Graham?
Yes, Ray, or indeed the offside rule.
OK, so let's kick about the concept of understanding, Graham. If you understand a thing, what does that mean you can do?
Well, it means you could explain a principle in your own words, for instance, Ray, or identify consequences or effects of an action.
OK, so already that's a higher order ability than scoring a point for my quiz team. What's the third level?
Well, then next we have application.
And what's that about?
Well, that involves being able to use information and materials to solve new problems or to apply principles to concrete situations.
So you're employing your knowledge and understanding for a purpose, to get a result.
That is exactly it, Ray, and I think you've neatly shown there why this is a hierarchy and why the levels are cumulative. You cannot understand something without the relevant foundational knowledge. You can't generally apply something that you do not understand.
I get it. So in footballing terms, at this level, I might be able to apply my understanding of the offside rule to look at the replay of a goal and determine whether it should be disallowed because a player was offside.
And that is a really good example. And notice that it's only at this level of cognition that you can actually demonstrate being able to do something with your knowledge and understanding.
Right, now that makes sense in all sorts of ways.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, I know a bloke who's brilliant at quizzes, knows all sorts of facts on subjects you wouldn't believe, but he has trouble holding down any kind of project, job or relationship.
I might know somebody like that. So you're saying that a strong level of basic cognitive ability doesn't indicate that you know what you're doing. That winning a TV game show, for instance, doesn't predict whether you can fill in a tax return or even conduct a conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Or, for instance, that knowing the 3 stages of money laundering are placement, layering and integration does not mean you can explain what that means nor spot them if they happened right in front of you.
Well, you make a very fair point, Graham.
And we're only halfway up the cognitive ladder, as it were, Ray.
Yeah.
There are 3 higher orders of thinking which we've yet to reach.
OK, so what's next after application then?
It is analysis, Ray. This is the ability to take materials and principles apart so that they can be examined and understood.
Now, is that really different from application, Graham?
Well, yes, it is, Ray. Application is about, for instance, being able to drive a car. Analysis is about working out why you keep stalling on hill starts, looking at the individual components of the operation and working out their impact on the overall performance and how changing one thing might get a different overall result.
OK, I think that's clear then, which leaves 2 more levels right at the top.
Yeah, and they are synthesis and evaluation. And, believe it or not, there is some controversy as to which outranks the other.
Yeah, so evaluation is about making judgments in complex situations based on variable criteria. This describes situations where there is perhaps no right or wrong answer, but where the aim might be to produce a result that fulfills specific purposes.
Yeah, that's it. And synthesis is about producing something new and creative.
So let's see if I can cut to the chase here. The artist then sees synthesis as superior, while the scientist thinks evaluation sits at the top. Is that right?
Well, I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, but I think, yeah, largely, yes.
OK, so back to our AML and compliance tests. Now, those can't hope to gauge something like synthesis, can they?
Not really, Ray, but I'd argue they don't really need to, and so would Professor Thomas Halladiner.
Now, who's he, Graham?
Well, he is the conceptual granddaddy of effective multiple choice tests, Ray. Across a number of both scholarly and more accessible works, he's laid out the modern approach to effective multiple choice testing.
And that modern approach accepts, doesn't it, Graham, that only the first 3 levels of cognition can be tested reliably using multiple choice questions.
You are absolutely right, Ray. You can use multiple choice tests to establish levels of knowledge, understanding and application, but really no further.
Now, given the types of test we're talking about, is that enough?
Well, I would argue it absolutely is, Ray. Yes, particularly where you have a test that goes beyond just simple recall of facts.
And I'm looking at you here, placement, layering and integration.
Well, quite. Then you can have tests that genuinely measure a person's ability and can predict the likelihood of their performance in relevant work-based situations.
And that's what we want our tests to do, isn't it?
Well, it really is. And right now, it's what very few of them actually do.
Now, why is that, Graham?
Well, I think for a whole range of reasons. Let's take some basic ones. First of all, what types of questions do we see most of and why?
Well, we see knowledge questions more than anything, Graham. They're really easy to write, for one thing. If you look at a body of material you want to test people on, you tend to look for anything that's a definite fact that you can quickly turn into a question.
Yeah, you mean like, quotes, what does the abbreviation SAR stand for instance?
Well, that's a much easier question to write and come up with options for than, say, which one of the following account activities would be likely to require a suspicious activity report to be filed.
And yet someone getting the second question, which is, let's be clear, an application question, correct, would, I think, give me much greater assurance that the person answering it was capable of meeting their obligations.
OK, so that's one problem, an over-reliance on knowledge questions.
Yes, but it's worth bearing in mind that any question, even a quite challenging understanding or application question, can end up becoming just a knowledge question.
Because the answer becomes known outside the test?
Yes. So let's take that application question on SARS. If you saw that question in the test you were taking, you'd have to take what you understand about suspicious activity and the obligation to report, and you'd have to consider perhaps 4 descriptions of different activity. You'd have to decide which one of them most clearly required reporting and select it.
Thus evidencing that when faced with a different scenario of a similar nature in the real world, you would probably be capable of doing the right thing.
Yes, but now imagine that you got the answer wrong. You said the one you would report was one of the innocent ones.
OK.
And then when you got feedback on your result, you were told that this was a question you'd failed to answer correctly and that the correct answer was, in fact, let's say, the student who was making a payment to a high-risk country.
Well, I got it wrong, and now I know what I should have answered.
Yes, you know. You don't necessarily understand. If that question comes up again next time, you'll get it right because you'll remember what the right answer should be. You will not be applying your understanding to reach the right answer, just your memory.
Yeah, and it will look like good evidence that you'll know what you're doing on the job because you've correctly answered an application level question. But in fact, it's no such thing. It's been reduced to just a knowledge level question.
Exactly, Ray, which is why we advise firms not to give feedback of the kind, you answered this question incorrectly, the correct answer was X, but instead to simply redirect candidates back to sections of the syllabus in which they dropped points.
Now that's a technical term I guess we're all familiar with, Graham. A syllabus is the specification of an area of study, isn't it? Rather than a nice lemony dessert.
Well, yes. Syllabubble, I think they're called, aren't they?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. But you're right, Ray. And syllabus-based feedback would tell our test taker who got the SAR question wrong, we recommend you review your understanding of syllabus area 4A, the requirements for reporting suspicious activity.
OK, Graham, so why else do our tests fail to gauge relevant ability properly?
Well, stress plays a part, Ray.
Oh, as in so many things, Graham.
Yes, but here its effects are thoroughly predictable. Do you remember Professor Halladiner?
From a few minutes ago, of course I do.
Well, he's also conducted research on the effects of high-stakes testing on both students and teachers. High-stakes testing refers to tests that have significant consequences for individuals or institutions, such as determining whether students will graduate or whether schools will receive funding.
Yeah, now I read that. The conclusions he came to were interesting.
Indeed, they were. He said that high-stakes testing can create a teaching to the test mentality, in which teachers focus narrowly on the material that is likely to be tested at the expense of other important content.
He also suggested that high-stakes testing can lead to cheating and other forms of unethical behaviour among students, as they may feel pressure to perform well at all costs.
Yes, he did. It's all pretty logical stuff. Put that into our world, Ray. How does that manifest?
Well, putting cheating to one side for a minute, we do see a great deal, don't we, of teaching to the test, where the training that precedes the test can seem to be aimed purely at getting people to pass that test, rather than giving them a full grounding in the syllabus.
What, you mean that you might particularly like to make a note of this type of training?
That's the sort of thing, yeah.
Yes, yeah, we see that sadly an awful lot. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that sometimes the test is designed first and then the training is built to cover all the points.
But of course, in an area of any complexity, 10 or 20 questions will only cover a sample of the learning. They can't hope to cover everything.
No, and that's why Halladiner and we strongly recommend that the people who write the training are segregated from the people who write the test.
So that the people writing the training don't know which bits of the syllabus will be tested, and therefore they have to cover it all in sufficient depth.
Exactly so, Ray. Each team should work independently from an agreed syllabus.
Now, I can see why training people shouldn't be involved in writing the test, but why couldn't the test writers see the training and work from that?
Well, because if you think about it, that would tend to lead to questions that are based on knowledge. I spot an example in the training and I base a question on it. The person taking the test might know the right answer because they remember it from the training rather than because they understand the principle.
I see.
And even at a more basic level, if the language you're using in building the questions replicates the language in the training, this will inevitably downgrade the cognitive level. One of the key aspects of understanding is to be able to put a concept in your own words or recognise that two differently worded explanations describe the same concept.
And if you're unconsciously using the same language, that's not coming out in your testing at all, is it?
That is right. Halladiner had one other highly relevant observation, of course.
He emphasised the importance of evaluating the quality and validity of high-stakes tests in order to ensure that the decisions based on those tests are fair and accurate. He's argued that high-stakes tests should be subject to rigorous validation procedures, and that the results should be interpreted carefully with attention to the limitations of the test and the potential impact on individuals and institutions.
Well, that sounds only fair, Ray, and I think we should take a second episode to look at that in a bit more detail, along with some of the practical things firms should do to make their tests as effective and as fair as possible.
I'm looking forward to it.